Hello, I'm going to talk about pros and cons of different stickings, why we might want to think about playing figures in different ways, and I'm going to use a very simple example, which is a flam tap, simply an accented flam stroke, followed by an unaccented stroke, which is your tap. And in the description below, I've put together a short PDF which goes through the examples I'm going to use. And so I'll play them first and then I'll explain a little bit about why we might want to use different options. So, example A is your standard flam tap, where the tap stroke is played by the same hand that just played the accent. So if I do flam to the right, then a right, flam to the left, then a left. That's the version that I suspect most people will be familiar with. Example B is an inverted flam tap, where the tap stroke is played by the hand that didn't just play the accent. Flam to the right, then it's a left, flam to the left, and then it's a right. Both of those, the standard and the inverted ones, are alternating rudiments. So you get a right-handed version, then a left-handed version. So it always goes from side to side. C and D are not alternating, they stay one way round. C is where one hand plays all of the low notes, the grace note for the flam and the tap stroke. The other hand just plays the accents. And finally, D is probably the most convoluted. We've got one hand playing the accent and the tap stroke, and the other hand just playing the grace notes. Okay, so there's your four versions. So you might be thinking, why would we want to use lots of different ways of doing this? Now, I can think of a few good reasons, so I'll just go through these. Number one, if you're on the drum kit or any other setup where you're playing more than one surface, then they give you different options for playing this figure around. So one way to approach this is to take the version and then just spend some time with it at the kit and see what you come up with, see what it allows you to do. So that's, yeah, I'd sort of say that's a no-brainer really in terms of using this material to develop some new language on the kit. But when it comes to just one surface, so particularly on snare drum, there are some pros and cons to using these different versions. So let me just go through those. Standard flam tap is the one that we can probably get fastest, because if you break it down to the individual hand movements, each hand is playing essentially a triple stroke, triple bounce. So it's two overlapping kind of triple bounces when you take it a little bit faster. So it can go faster. On the negative side, because it goes into a triple bounce, you have less control over the tap stroke and therefore less chance of getting it dynamically separated from the accent. So it can go faster and you can probably play it more legato than some of the other ones, but you won't have the dynamic separation that some of the others will allow you. Example B, the inverted flam tap. This one you can definitely get dynamic separation because you're going from the tap stroke into the next accent. So you can really use enough movement to change the dynamics there. Hope this is making some sense. And unfortunately, because of that upstroke, it gets in the way of the speed. So for me personally, my inverted flam taps never get anywhere near as fast as my standard versions. I suspect that's fairly normal. Right, version C, again, I think there's a speed payoff because one hand is playing constant notes, so you're at the liberty of how fast you can move one stick. That's probably about me. Depends on the day, but there we go. On the plus side, because it always lands the same way around, you can get more consistency. Now, if you play traditional grip like I do, then one of the, I suppose, negative sides of the grip is that it's relatively hard to balance the hands. So we're always trying to work on getting the right and left to sound similar. So if you do a sticking that doesn't alternate, then that takes care of it for you. So that might be a reason to use this in a musical situation. And finally, D. Now, I can't think of any good points for this. It's got the consistency that C has, because it's always the same way around. But to be honest, it's only really any use as a stick exercise. I can't think of any particular musical reason for doing it. Unless I go back to my earlier point about putting it on the kit, where you might find, if you want the one-handed thing on one drum and the grace note on another drum or drums, then it will give you some options. But I can't think of any kind of strong reason why you would want to use that if you're just playing snare. Okay, there we go. That's the whole thing. Like I said earlier, I've taken this very simple example because I think it's easy to see what the different options are available to us. But I think this is a good principle to run with in some other contexts. So over to you now. Why don't you take something a bit more in depth? You could just add another note, so something like a flam accent, so a flam triplet. Then we do a couple more of those just to make it clear. We can obviously do that, or the Swiss version, etc., etc. If you've gone through all of your basic rudiments, you'll have come across some of these patterns, but I guarantee there will be ways of sticking these that don't appear in the standard rudiments, and probably for very good reason. But if you spend a bit of time thinking about them, exploring them, you might actually come up with something that's useful, or you might at least be thinking, okay, why do I use the standard versions, and what's good and what's bad about them, and why might I want to use them in particular situations. There we go. Over to you. And if this is useful, please let me know. It's always good to have some feedback on these videos. Enjoy your drumming. All right, see you around.